So I'm kind of curious about why you've chosen to sort of position this as a game at all. That you're using that word, because especially, I keep thinking about this and hearing the conversations people are having about it, and a lot, especially when I'm talking to people who are outside the industry, who aren't game designers and stuff like that, there's this trivialization that goes along with the word game. It's just a game. That there aren't any real consequences to it, and then you have this system, which seems like it actually is going to have some consequences to it. Fundamentally, what we've got going on here, if I'm understanding it correctly, is it's a training system coupled with a sort of elaborate survey system. At the other end, you get this set of participants and some notion of a point system of what they consider most important to them, and that is going to presumably be taken by these developers and being acted upon. So yeah, I just wanted to hear a little more about why you're calling it a game as opposed to something else. What does that get?
Well, I mean, the reason why we're calling, the things that are most gamey about the system, I suppose, are the fact that there is an element of competition is important. Essentially the incentive structure, I think, is an important piece of why the game structure matters to this. I don't necessarily agree that it's an elaborate survey system, because I guess, and maybe this is part of the, we didn't do a very good job of explaining it, but there's a qualitative element to that. It's not just about kind of responding to multiple choice questions. That there's an element to the game that is going to be creating alliances, which we didn't talk about at all, actually. But the idea is that one can sort of pool their resources with other like-minded people and pool points and coins, and there's a sort of social strategy piece to the game that we didn't really talk about. Why? And then you said this other thing about the perception of the sort of general perception of games maybe being problematic. It may be, and it may actually have the opposite effect, that it may be enticing and exciting to play a game about one's neighborhood. So I guess there's two answers to your question. One, I do think that it's more of a game than an interactive survey, and then the other thing is that I think actually the concept and the term game is something that we want to capitalize on and not shy away from.
So, for example, the work you've already done in Chinatown, how did people respond to that at the meetup? Were people playing the game? Were they comfortable with the concept of that there was a game that actually had these real consequences, that they'd all played this game together and now they were going to have real outcomes?
They were. One of the things that was really exciting about the Chinatown game is that many people came to the meeting not comfortable with the game. Many people came to the meeting with their teenage kids who were going to play the game, and then the adults ended up playing the game themselves. So it was so like they needed that buffer to get into, because as you say, there's this sort of context of gaming that people that people have associations with. But ultimately, the game ended up not turning people off. And what we ended up finding, and that we did in the surveys after the game, is that the people that had very little game experience were the people that enjoyed the game most, in fact. That we actually lost both ends. The people who considered themselves gamers weren't all that impressed, and the people who have never played a game before weren't all that impressed. But in the middle, and especially in that low end, that people were really excited about the idea that they played a game about their neighborhood. And that was a 3D game, and so one of the things that people really enjoyed was just walking through the environment, right? That looked like the Chinatown that they knew. So just that stuff, that was really enticing for people, and they got into the whole concept of the game, that I think benefited the system, and it actually helped bring people to the meeting, because not only did we already have youth involved that were sort of extending out into their networks, that they were helping to design a game about their neighborhood, but we also got to sort of advertise this thing as a game about Chinatown. And people were very intrigued about playing a game about their neighborhood, and not just look at a model of your neighborhood, or ask to answer a few questions about your neighborhood. So, I'm really invested in using the idea of the game to less so to sort of change the perception of the games, and more so to bring those existing perceptions of sort of fun and frivolity to what is often associated with being really boring and hard work, and not having a lot of consequences. So.
I think one other thing I want to add is, we're designing this in a way, we have to engage with, there may be some super users who actually do want to play. They want to challenge their friends to these different missions, so it's a safety mission, and they want, I don't know, or there's a public space mission, and they want to challenge all their friends to go to their favorite park, or things like that. I mean, they'll actually be playing this as a game, and some people won't be using Community Planet specifically as a game, as we normally think about games. And they'll just want to kind of do what they think is just giving their opinion on things. Overall, the whole system, I see it as a big planning game. But how those people won't want to play something that's called a game. I can see some planners just calling this, participation tool, because they don't want to utter, and they probably will. They don't want to utter this, as a game, because again, you think, well, it's okay. It's why they're just having fun. We have serious work to do. And I think people some people do call the Chinatown game a tool, talking to planners, and so that, they understand kind of what the purpose of this thing was, not just for fun. It was to kind of facilitate participation. But again, we're doing it kind of around the game structure.
So I'd like to actually suggest some tweaks, because I mean, assuming that the game is successful in being an enticement and getting people engaged who weren't necessarily engaged. Now I'm thinking about the people who take it too seriously, almost. The people who treat it as a game to the point that they will be either making decisions that they don't necessarily believe in because it's a game. You're supposed to be able to try out alternative. The game's supposed to give you the freedom to be able to try out things they wouldn't necessarily want to do in real life. And on the other hand, people who take the factions and the alliances and stuff so seriously that and they'll play that to win in a game that actually has lasting consequences. And like you said, it's transparent. Or who's allied with who, could actually lead into real factions for the rest of for that community as an outcome of the game, which may not necessarily be what you want. You might want to actually think about how you're going to get people together. So one thing that I'm going to suggest is that you've got this 6-week thing and you've got this 6-value thing, and taking the idea from Matt, which is letting people, giving people the ability to tweak these things. It seems like the coins shouldn't be spent cumulatively. It's like what you spend this week is kind of tallied up for that week, and you can take a page from things like reality TV to allow one of the topics to get voted off almost, or you vote for your topics and 5 of them stay, 1 goes off, and there's some writing process to be able to suggest new stuff in. So, and not waiting until the end of that 6th week to start the discussion, because you can do things like online discussion, message boards, forums, and stuff like that, and to get people talking about what's left, what are the values that are currently up there, and are these the values, the ones that we want to see make it to the final 6, because which one of these 6 values people like more than others may be less important than which 6 values the community as a whole can kind of agree on are all important, and it seems to me that if you can, maybe not the specific tweak that I'm suggesting, but a system like that which allows people to already start discussing about, wait, why did you vote for that? Why do you think this is more important than that thing? Before you get to the meetup, could be more informative in the long run for the community and for the planners, because for the planners, they get to see at the 6, well, this is not the first 6 that we started with. This is a completely different set of 6, but this is what the community agreed on.
So the problem with that is that right now these 6 values are also the thematic structures of each of the weeks. Mm-hmm. So I don't see how some of those weeks. So if we use these 6 as an example, by the time you get to walkability, where everything in the, and it wouldn't be walkability, it would be like transportation, so transportation in the neighborhood. And everything in that week has to do with how you get from one place to another, and looking at problems with sidewalks or possibilities with sidewalks or whatever it might be. It's possible that we think that actually what will happen is that people will begin to spend maybe more of their coins on those themes that they don't get to until later. So that's why when you spend your coins, you can move them around. It's not like they're stuck there. Now, if we did what you're suggesting and people create their values, then then all of a sudden we'd have to change the system where they wouldn't be voting on the themed weeks or the themed missions. They'd be voting on a whole different taxonomy. And I'm not seeing how that would work yet. I mean, I like the idea. I like the idea that at the end the community sort of comes up with their primary values. But if that's the structure of the game, then it's hard to be flexible.
Here, this is kind of a question I had dovetailing from what Constantine had asked before and from what you're asking, is that the impression I got when you talk about the curator, like the people running this, is that they are coming from the ranks of the developers/planners.
Yeah.
Right? I actually feel like you need multiple curators and community-generated curators, like they build them and then hand them to you. But community-sourced, so that it's not just the people, because as Constantine said, right, if the developers are the people who want the parking lot, then...
Wouldn't be a developer, so don't confuse the developer with the planner.
Right.
But,
right.
So developers would have nothing to do with this.
But someone's going to assume the developer has something to do with it. No matter if the developer's involved or not,
Perhaps.
the public is going to assume the developer controlled which the categories are.
The way we're suggesting that thing gets curated is we're actually using the model that we used in the Chinatown game, which was that we worked with both a planning agency, which are planners, and a community organization, which already had the trust in the community. So in this case, we worked with the aptly titled ACDC, or Asian Community Development Corporation, that is very trusted in Chinatown, and they were the ones that were, that engaged the community most closely. That when they were told about the game, it came from the trusted CDC and not from some random person who is introducing a game to the neighborhood. And there was a community-sourced piece of the material. So what we're hoping actually is that the timeline that we're giving to communities, as we say, that the ideal situation is that 10 weeks before the start of the game, you start the community process in curating the content. Meaning you engage, your cadre of youth, you engage the stakeholders that you can identify, maybe even have, community meetings around developing this. Like we're actually suggesting that the curation process is not just, one evil guy with a patch in a room, like coming up with the content of the game. So, but again, that's just a suggestion, and it's going to vary from neighborhood to neighborhood.
I guess my thought was, I keep cutting you off. I'm really sorry. But I guess my thought was, I think Philip's suggestion of a mission that changes depending on the tenor of the discussion is important.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you're going to have curators who are from the community and not from the planning team, which I think my question originally was going to be, who the hell are these people? And which you answered. But I mean, I think if you want to take the Chinatown game as an example, to me it feels like it would be really important to have that community trusted team measuring the tenor of the discussion over the course of the 6 weeks, rather than just going, well, before these 6 weeks we decided these are the issues, and damn it, these are the issues. And I feel like there's got to be some sort of balance between what Philip is suggesting, where you have dynamic content, because it seems like you have the potential for dynamic content, and being able to use that trusted community curator as your in on making it so that it's not just, well, we've completely thrown out everything we just spent 3 months planning, which is, goofy, but that you at least can get in some sort of, well, suddenly this event or this thing or this concept that we've realized suddenly became very important now. And if you don't react to it and suddenly take advantage of the fact that it's important to people, they're not going to feel like they have any agency. in the sense that they're going to be like, well, here's this thing that we want to talk about, and the missions are just like, well, too bad.
I mean, it could be something like this. It could be, the missions are what they are, the themed missions are what they are. And it could be that people don't spend their coins on the names of the themed missions, but in fact, so for instance, if one of the missions is transportation, which includes, bike transportation and walking and driving and train and bus, all of those issues in one week's mission, it could be that in fact what people spend their coins on is walkability. So it's a concept that comes out of the mission, but maybe we actually allow people to spend their coins on concepts that are not necessarily tied to the names of the missions, and those we can start off with this like 10 suggestions of concepts, and people can add their own as they choose, and it might I don't know, it's off the top of my head, but it might be some way that can be a more dynamic process where there's a combination where we can maintain the structure of the mission so it gives the curator something to work with, and yet have this dynamically created sort of folksonomy of ideas that people can spend their coins on.
I just wanted to add that I don't think that I also think it's important to not over-design things. So I mean, I have no idea if any of this stuff will work, but
Neither do we. But
I guess that for me, there's only and discussing is fine, but there's only, I mean, it's not like you're going to go, that's the right idea, and then know it.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? The only way you find out is actually by playing it and giving it to people. So whenever you first do this, I mean, that's your beta test, right?
Yeah.
That's your public beta, when you're doing it. And I guess for the thing I would say, going back on my previous question, would just be to keep the kind of like ability for the people to affect the democratic rules in mind in whatever revision, in whatever live revision process you have as you move forward. I mean, I don't think it's for me also there's value in simplicity, and you're not going to get everything right the first time. It's just the most important thing is to realize the game is a living thing that is always changing, and just keep that as part. Just keep that idea in whatever process you have as you move forward. Is my
Just
opinion.
a quick thing to add to that. Just a brief that, from what I can tell, getting engagement in some of the most successful ARGs, the people who run the ARGs generally assume that what they've designed is going to change mid-game, based on how they observe people playing the game. So taking the idea of don't over-design it just a little bit further. Don't even assume that the game that you're going to start on week 1 is the same game that you're going to have. It's the same plan that you're going to have by week 6, because I think people actually do get really excited when people who design the game make tweaks to accommodate how people are actually playing it, and that actually promotes engagement because they start realizing that.
This is supposed to be a platform already, so it's kind of like, how is the platform going to address the kind of changes as you go, or
Well,
if it's possible?
Well, some of it we can change the platform, but I mean, if that's appropriate. But I think that our goal is that we're going to start in one. We'll probably do our first community in May. They're starting in May, and then from there we're going to go to a larger launch with about 5 communities throughout the country. But we can learn a lot from that first community, and that can be, and essentially what we're going to do is we're just going to create an archive of best practices, and I would assume that the 10th community that tries this can learn from the 9 previous and take it from there, because yes, I think that there's going to be all sorts of issues about how to roll out content, for instance, for the maximum engagement. But we're not going to know what that looks like until after we do it. That's right.
I kind of wish that your expected communities were a little more nerdy, if only because I'm kind of envisioning this, like, instead of Dungeons and Dragons, zoning and buildings. I mean, because when we're talking about the curator, they kind of sound to me, and I don't LARP much, but you might be able to back me up on this. Yeah, they sound like a dungeon master,
Sure,
or
yeah.
the person who's kind of directing a LARP to me, and kind of when you had first described it, the curator to me rather sounded like the administrator in Team Fortress 2, right? Who's just saying, this is how it is, get used to it. But I don't know. I guess over time, I've started to think of it as like this. You kind of are LARPing with the fate of an entire community, and the fact that these really look like a D&D character sheet with stats not helping.
Well, I mean, if that helps you, then I think that's good. And it may be that, I mean, we're gonna roll this out in Somerville. I'm sure there's nerds there.
But like the key thing is that as someone who's run pen and paper role playing before, the key thing is that you start up thinking, here's this amazing story I'm going to tell using my players, and then the players are like, I'm doing something totally different than you had any idea you were ever going to do ever. And you're like, well, damn it. Now you have to change the whole arc of your story. Yeah, pretty much. We don't kill the lobster, we go shopping. Oh, well, that's just fantastic.
I think that you really are going to have to think really hard about cheating. I think that you can't assume that everyone playing the game is going to be altruistic. So I think you either have to assume that the votes that you're compiling here are sort of for conversation starting purposes only, and not in any way used for any actual decisions. Because I think there are any number of ways that you can game this system. And you're calling it a game, and you're encouraging people to make alliances and do this and have shifting votes and blah, blah, blah. So you're encouraging them to game the system, whether or not explicitly, but they're going to get the idea that they should be doing so. And so I think that you're going to very, very quickly find people who do game the system. And what's worse is, it's not going to show up in testing. Probably, because your first 3 or 4 tests, you're going to have people who are mostly agreeable, they're mostly naive. Great, let's say you deploy it, it takes off, everybody uses it, that's awesome. The 1000th test, which is you guys are no longer involved, you published the platform, it's sitting up there, you guys are on to other things. Someone says, oh, well, we know how to game this.